Good King Dartsel Sloss looked out on the college season, where five quick sleepers lay roundabout, deep and crisp and even. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. And you can call me Chuck. This is episode, I believe, number 188. Episode number 187 was last week, and that was with Carl Schoening, who is actually the voice of the Austin Spurs. We talked about sort of life in the G League, how the G League is evolving as an organization and as a league, especially developmentally, where I believe it's going to become increasingly relevant to follow and cover the G League. And we talked about the Austin Spurs, who I believe have two players who will make contributions to that team when that team plans to be good in Dominic Barlow and Sidi Sissoko. Dom and Sini are two of many prospects floating about in the G League that I think not only are going to affect NBA outcomes, but that shrewd general managers should be looking to target. And we covered a lot more in that episode, but I encourage people to look at that episode and revisit it. This episode, number 188, is going to be about the 2024 draft cycle and five quick sleepers that I have believed that I've identified. These are not going to be anything land shattering or earth shattering, land shaking, earth shattering. And really, they're people who watch college basketball know these guys. They fall under the general rubric of productive players in college tend to be productive in the NBA. But I have changed my scouting process a little bit, or I guess evolved it this coming year for 2024, in that I'm watching a lot more, a lot earlier than I have in the past. In past years, I've sort of waited until conference play is kicked up to really dive in, but I've been watching pretty steadily from the beginning of the season. And I can say that, this draft, for all of its negative reputation thus far, at least at the top, I think part of that has to do with the fact that the best players are really not in college this year, not to me. I mean, I've done 2 episodes on this draft cycle so far. One was on the ACC. That was really right at the beginning of the season with Brian Geisinger. One was on the Pac-12. That was with Zach Milner. I'm going to have one on the Big 12 coming next week, and I'll go until I hit all the power conferences. I'll do a mid-major episode that I got in the works with a fun guest. And then I will shift my attention towards the G League Ignite and towards Australia and towards Europe and dive into the guys in the top 10 who are going to be in the top 10. Guys like Ron Holland and Alexander Sarr and Nikola Topic and Matas Buzelis, Zachary Rissochet, if that's how you say his name. But these players who are likely to end up in the top 10 and or the lottery, the guys who really project to either run an NBA offense or be impact wing players, which tend to be what highly drafted players turn out as these days. But I'll get to those in due time. I'm doing the majority of my NCAA work right now. And in doing that NCAA work, I have 5 guys that I believe are being slept on. I mean, the mocks that I've seen might have 1 or 2 of these guys in sort of the late first round mix. I believe all 5 of them deserve consideration, probably as top 35-ish guys, and 1 or 2 of them should be receiving lottery consideration. And the framework that I'm going to choose to look at them at, and I'll run through them as quick as I can. I really don't plan for this to be a solo 90-minute episode, but I am choosing to look at them through the framework of a piece I wrote this summer. Now, I don't do a really good job promoting the stuff I write or record, but my Substack, which is chuckingdarts.substack.com, I hope to add to it more frequently, but currently there are 2 recent pieces. One was my 2023 sort of draft piece, where I had my big board and all that. But the piece I'm talking about for this episode today was a piece where I ranked over 100 darts young players in the NBA, young meaning that they are not yet extension eligible. they have completed 2 seasons or fewer in the NBA. So in the article I wrote, I was essentially ranking as many players as I thought were going to be relevant from the 2021, 2022, and 2023 draft classes. I'm not here to go through those rankings, especially as it applies to these 5. However, what I will say is check that piece out. If you go to my pinned tweet at Chucking Darts, it's in the reply to that, so it doesn't get completely suppressed. And I want to reference that piece mainly for how I organized that article, which is I had 7 different tiers, because not only did I try to rank guys 1 through 100 and whatever, I grouped them according to what I thought their eventual NBA impact would be. One of the values of doing that exercise is you sort of learn how many players really affect the NBA at a given level. You have your sort of finals MVP possible level players. You have, and that was Victor Wembanyama in the piece for reference. But then you have all NBA guys, and then you have guys who sort of could make an all NBA team and are likely to make multiple all-star games. You have fringe all-star guys who might make 1 or 2, but he'll never make the all NBA. Those are really the first 4 tiers of that article. Tier 5 was clear starters, players who I felt like are exactly that, but are unlikely to ever make an all-star game. Tier 6 is matchup starters, players who do start in the NBA, but are much more dependent on a particular context and a particular offense to be able to contribute as a starter. They don't start on every team because they have certain flaws. And then there are players who sort of have starter theories, but are more likely to settle in sort of a high rotation 6th through 8th man kind of scenario. Those are sort of the 6 tiers that comprise the vast majority of that article. Tier 7 was guys who are going to bounce around. They may not get necessarily extended by their drafting team, but have obvious NBA talent for one reason or another, but just, don't really have the skill level to level up. Now, again, you can look at that piece and see mistakes I've already made in composing it. My biggest miss on that by far is I had in that sort of last tier, that back tier, that bounce around tier, I had Jaime Jaquez, so that is long gone. But I think a lot of it still does hold up. I am proud of it. I still stand by a lot of it. And in each of these tiers, I equated them to an eventual contract value and an eventual, or not an eventual, and sort of an average draft slot. One of the benefits of doing this by combining 3 draft classes is you can essentially say, okay, if I rank this guy 24th, that means over the course of 3 draft classes, on average, he's about an 8th overall pick. That is, if you agree with my ranking. So in doing my draft work this time around, I'm trying to think of places where I think players could fall, not only in this draft class for whatever strengths or weaknesses it may have, but in an average draft class, how good is this player? And even though that may change, that may not affect where he gets picked in this draft, because you can only, you only have 1 draft in which to pick a player. It does help add another dimension, at least in my mind, to what a player's value really is. If you can try to figure out where this player would go in an average draft, then you can start to more easily place him in the NBA field in which he will be competing as soon as he gets picked and gets a shot. And these guys, these 5 that I'm going to get to, are 5 that I believe currently are being way undervalued, because where they're being valued at, some late first, some in the second, some beyond the second round, are essentially saying these are like fringe NBA guys that we don't even expect to bounce around. I have 7 tiers that I ranked, and everything else was sort of an honorable mention. And so my 7th tier, for example, it started at pick 75, went from pick 75 down to 57. Number 75, for example, was Chris Duarte. Number 56, pardon me, 56, not 57. 56 was Jose Alvarado. So those players that I said are have theories to be starters, but are more likely to just be high rotation guys. I said that their consensus draft value was pick 18 to pick 25, right? Pick 18 to pick 25. 25 times 3, 75. That's where I put Duarte. I said an eventual yearly contract value of 10 million to 14 million. So I think that all 5 of these players that I'm going to talk about for the 2024 draft cycle, I think all 5 of them basically have a case to at least be in this 7th tier or higher. And I'll go into specifics for each one, but that's enough ado. I'll just get to these 5 and why I think they are all being underrated. I'll say that by and large, they all have what I believe are, NBA touch, NBA shooting ability, and they all bring something that I think will play well against opponents once they get in the NBA landscape. Again, that sounds obvious, but in the spirit of not trying to lose the forest for the trees and get too lost in minutia, suffice to say that if you're going to play in the NBA, you better be able to do well with NBA space and make quick decisions and put the ball in the hoop when it gets to you, if that's what you're expected to do. So we'll try to find other through lines with all these as they go. But the one I really want to talk about the most, the one who I feel is probably the most underrated, I've seen him in not even some top 100s, and certainly I've not seen him mocked in the first round yet anywhere, is Devin Carter, who's a guard for Providence. Now, when I get to my Big East episode, I will be discussing Devin Carter a lot. I will likely, if anyone is wanting to have me on, if anyone is nice enough to have me on as a guest this draft cycle, I will bring up Devin Carter's name as frequently as I possibly can. Devin is 21 years old, turns 22, I believe, in March. He's a 6'3" guard on Providence, and he is one of the very best perimeter defenders in college basketball. Okay. If you look at how the NBA trade landscape is developing and how interested so many teams have been in Alex Caruso, they're interested in him for very obvious reasons. Caruso is a first-team all-defense performer. He is very adept, probably the best in the league at not only going over screens and avoiding being screened, but drawing offensive fouls on the screener by engaging in sort of a chess match just out of his peripheral vision about how he is positioning himself and how he is trying to get over a screen to try to force the screener to shift their hip out a little bit more, take a little extra half step, and then he sells that context to the ref who call, a moving screen. That is like a very cool thing that Alex Caruso does. Obviously, it's part of his overall package, but he is also just tough as hell, a really tough on-ball defender, great hands, great communicator, good rebounder, and is shooting very well this year. It's the type of guy that can complement any single star. Without getting into too much of a tangent about this draft, I think that one of the concerns about it is its lack of star power. That may be true, it may not be true. But players who are real value adds, 2 stars, are still massively, massively valuable NBA players. Derek White in Boston is getting so much love this year and has been since he's gotten there for that reason. And, I think Alex and Derek White are of a similar stripe. Devin Carter, I'm not here to say that he's going to be as good as either of those players, because those 2 are high-end outcomes for this type. But he is of that type. Devin can get over just about any screen. He plays incredibly hard, rebounds very well here. Pardon me for looking away, but he is at 8 rebounds a game as a guard. He's averaging 16 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, and then over a steal a game and over a block a game as a guard. And he takes the best perimeter assignment on any given night. So to keep that block rate high, it means that, number one, he's very disciplined because he's not getting himself in foul trouble and removing himself from games, but that he can also block in recovery on drives, or at least trailing on drives. And he can block on jump shots, closing out. He just has the athletic ability and the discipline, not unlike Caruso or, the wing version of this is Herb Jones, to get out and to really contest. It's no accident why coaches love these guys and, sing their praises, Caruso, White, Jones, all the time. And Devin's going to be that way. Now, my guess as to why he hasn't cracked a ton of first round conversations yet in draft circles is because there's been a question about his shooting. Well, this year he's currently shooting, 48% from the field, 39% from three, 67% from the line. So it's not as though he has insane touch. But I would also say that Caruso didn't have insane touch when he came into the league either. That maxim that defense gets you on the floor in the NBA, that is true as long as you're really, really, really good at it. And Devin is really, really, really good at it. And I've given essentially the pitch, but the reason why I think he is such a sure thing, why I think he could help virtually any team, and why I think he's going to return top 20 value in this draft, and I might have him in the lottery by the time I'm done, is because not every team has a version of this player. And that's very important. When you look draft over draft and you just go around rosters, not many teams have an on-ball hound who can also make positive connecting passes and, shoot and rebound for their position. Someone might have an on-ball hound. Someone might have a Patrick Beverley, to cite one example. And Patrick maybe used to be a bit more like this, but is older now. But they're more of a specialist because they don't have a complete game. Devin has a complete game. His handle needs work. His sort of point guard overall decision-making needs work. He can't run a whole game at point. And Providence uses him, coming off of, wide screens coming up from the corner. They use him as an on-ball threat. And then he tries to get into the lane, force contact, and finish. It's another thing he's really good at, is absorbing contact and finishing. But he's not a traditional point guard. But that's okay. It might, again, depress his draft stock because he's 6'3" and not a traditional point guard, and that might spook some teams. But in the NBA, the only players who get to operate the ball are the very best players anyway. In fact, it takes a lot of people who are used to having their ball in their hands a lot of time to learn how to play off the ball and support those guys. And I think it's not going to take Devin very long. I think he's going to be a very quick study, and he's going to take assignments that other people don't want, and he's going to be able to do it at a level that will stick out pretty quick. So I love him. I'm going to talk about him more in the Big East episode, but if I'm looking at one of these tiers, again, I would put him, let's see. I would think that he is eventually going to be what I call a tier, let's call it tier 6, which is a matchup starter. That's the matchup starter tier. These are guys who could start in the right circumstance on the right team. Even Caruso, I think he's starting now that Zach LaVine is not playing for the Bulls anymore. But before that, he was a rotation guard and matchup. And even though he was, you still hear that the Bulls are asking for 2 first-round picks for him at the deadline. That's how valuable he is. And, you talk to Laker fans, they still rue that they didn't, break into luxury tax to really bring him back. So matchup starters are guys whose consensus draft value tends to be between pick 12 and pick 17 with an eventual yearly contract value I'm projecting at up to $20 million a year. So I think that Devin, once he gets into the league, once he assimilates, has a great chance of being of that class. So that to me is a mid first round pick. So that's one. A second of a different kind is PJ Hall, who's a senior at Clemson. Now, PJ is going to get a lot of love eventually because he's going to be the ACC player of the year, or at least I think he's easily the favorite for that distinction now. Clemson, I think, just lost their first game to Memphis, I think they're 9-1. And he is averaging, 20 points, 7 rebounds, 2.5 assists, a steal a game, and 2.5 blocks, because PJ is 6'10". And what PJ does is just controls a game really from beginning to end on offense. As the big on Clemson, he can operate down in the post where he can easily beat mismatches because he's well built, has good footwork, has really good touch. Or facilitating from above the breaker at the elbows. He's very used to that. He's very good at passing out of doubles. He's very good at, just sort of reading defensive coverages and knowing where they're going to rotate and when. He's good at, spraying kind of skips to the corners so that, to facilitate a catch and drive. He's just a really good, sound player. Now, there are really good, sound players every year that don't necessarily do a ton in the NBA. What I think separates PJ is that, he is shooting 54% from the field, 37% from three, 76% from the line. He also has a block rate of over 9. I said 2.5 blocks a game. And so he to me is an interesting one because there are guys, if you think of rotation big who's stuck around in the league doing some of the same things. The first name that pops to mind is Kelly Olynyk, who had 27 last night and is going to be in demand again at the trade deadline. Again, I'm not saying that PJ is going to be as successful as Kelly, but I think he is of a similar skill level, physical, and this kid's release. He is not your typical college pick and pop slow loading shooter. He has a very quick release from three for someone as big and as physical as he is. Last year, I thought out of him and his teammate, Hunter Tyson, that PJ was the better NBA prospect. And Hunter gets, I think, a guaranteed deal, or at least he got a draft promise from the Nuggets and is in their G League right now. If they were, not at the top of the league, he'd probably be getting more time with the NBA club. But any lineup that PJ is going to play in is going to be able to, space him, and will likely be playing 5 out unless he's playing with another big who can't shoot. But the fact that I think that he has a real chance to play backup 5 as a high volume 3-point shooter means that he should be able to provide offensive value to really any unit that he's in. I think that there are circumstances where he could play alongside starters because, again, he can rebound, he can communicate, and his mind is quick enough on offense to hang. But even if he doesn't, even if he is more a bench player than he is a starter, he's going to be able to provide dimensions that other bigs just aren't going to be able to provide. There's always a tension in NBA circles about what is the slowest position to develop. And it seems like, whenever anyone discusses any player and this conversation comes up, it's just that player's position is the hardest to develop. If you talk about a Jalen Green, young guards are notoriously slow to develop. If you're talking about Jonathan Kuminga, it's he's a wing. Wings are really slow to develop. It's so hard to crack a rotation with how Golden State plays. If you talk about bigs, same thing. I think that bigs are legitimately the hardest thing to really develop in the league, because so many bigs come in with sort of rough defensive feel or footwork, and bigs are so relied upon by NBA teams to provide defensive value. And so it's really hard to and there's fewer places to play bigs in a given lineup. For a lot of 5s, ones who can't shoot, there's only one spot at a time for those kind of players, unless you're the Detroit Pistons. For everyone else, there's only one spot, and that's likely occupied by someone who's going to play 30 minutes a night anyway. So you better be good enough to survive in the other 18 if you're a young player, or else you're going to get forgotten, and it can take a lot of time. PJ is going to have a leg up on a lot of those guys because he can shoot. And I think, will he be a great defensive NBA big? No, but I think he can survive for stretches. And, it's a real shortcut to being able to provide value for your team if you can survive as a 5 and, play like a 4 on offense. And so that's what I see out of him. He can also attack from the perimeter off the dribble. He is comfortable doing that as well. And it's just, he has a lot of feel. My big miss in my article was Jaquez. That was my big draft miss in 2023. PJ isn't a wing in the way that Jaquez is a wing, but he has a similar level of feel and is a better shooter than Jaquez coming out. So I think, again, another sort of mid-first round pick, tier 6 matchup starter kind of player. That's what I see PJ as. And he's someone who right now is going in the 30s or the 40s. So I think that's way, way low for him. Now, these other 3 are, I guess more along the lines of just what I think are solid bets. I feel less strongly about these 3 than I do about Devin and about PJ, but I'll get to each of them hopefully a bit more quickly. I apologize already for the time I've taken up. So one is Hunter Sallis. Okay. Hunter Sallis is 6'5", 6'6", kind of undersized wing for Wake Forest. He was the number 15 recruit in the country his senior year in high school. He went to Gonzaga and he played with, Chet Holmgren. I think he played, trying to remember if he played with Jalen Suggs before that or if that was a different year. But there's been a lot of talent at Gonzaga while he was there. And they kind of used him as a defensive specialist and never really let him spread his wings on offense. He transfers to Wake now for his junior year, and he's a young junior. He doesn't turn 21 until March 26th. So he's 20 years old right now, which is the age of a lot of sophomores. And Wake, which is a very offensively tilted team with a very good offensive coach in Steve Forbes, and his production is skyrocketed. I think he averaged something like 5 points a game his sophomore year at Gonzaga, and now he's averaging 18 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal, and like half a block. And so, there was a real question as to whether or not he could shoot at an NBA level coming into this year. He wasn't really on a lot of prospect lists because until you can score more than 5 points a game, the NBA is not going to give you much of a look. But Wake really prioritizes playing 5 out as much as they possibly can, and they prioritize having 2 or 3 guards on the floor at any given time to make sure that ball movement is crisp and whatever action they're running is, on time, where there's a decision maker that's going to spray the ball to the right spot. And Hunter not only has participated in that, but he's really he has gotten so aggressive with his shot in a way that I never thought that he would. He's made, I think, 25 threes already or in that neighborhood. And we're at, a third of the way through the season. For reference, Anthony Black made 28 threes all of last year, and he went 6th overall. Anthony has a lot of skills, but if you can make 50 threes in your pre-NBA year, and I'm not talking about percentages, I'm just saying if the ball goes in the hoop from 3 50 times in your year before you get drafted, I tend to think you have a pretty good shot of having that stick in the NBA. Now, you may not make it because you can't defend or because you're not a good decision maker or you're not big enough or whatever. But for a guy like Sallis, who has always been a pretty solid defensive player and whose shot was the question, if he has a year, especially at age 20, to be 23, where he can make 53s, then I'm pretty good in saying he's going to be just fine. The threes that he's made, some have been sort of one dribble pull-ups, others have been catch and shoots. He's not really going to be like a movement shooter, but he has enough rhythm in his shot to where I think he'll be able to figure it out as long as the rest of his game keeps him on the floor. Now, my biggest concern for him is actually that rebounding number at only 3 a game is not quite good enough, in my opinion. For someone who came in with a defensive reputation, and Wake Forest, like I said, offensive team, so they're not going to be really clamping anyone. But I would like to see him be able to affect the game more, maybe when his shot isn't going in. But we're still in the early stages of the season. A usage jump like this for Hunter, where he's doing so much more on offense, is of course going to lead to some regression in his all-around game. And though I think he is still obviously a very good defender, he is not in, Devin Carter's league on that side of the ball. So it's not as though he is physically overwhelming opposing guards and some wings the way that Carter can. So it's getting to the point where his offensive game is going to be more of a ticket for him than his defense, which again is not something I ever thought I'd say about Hunter Sallis. But for someone who is legitimately, 6'5" in that area with some length and who has a decently sound all around offensive game at age 20, I think that, out of all these guys, because of his high school reputation, Sallis is going to get first round looks. So he may not be that underrated for much longer, but I could see him as certainly a tier 7 kind of high rotation piece, someone who may not ever really start, but has a shot to get extended by his drafting team. Because even though he may not be a max player, there's still someone, he'll be too valuable for a team to just let go in restricted free agency. That's what I think Hunter Sallis has a chance to be. So for what that's worth, I think that he has a real shot. We'll see. I think Wake, they just added Efton Reed, Naz Reed's younger brother, and they have a pretty decent squad. If they ever get Monsanto back, who's their volume shooter, they'll have a really complete team. We'll see how they do in the ACC, but keep an eye on Hunter Sallis. Usually in the NBA draft, once you get past pick 15 or 20, you're just sort of hunting for wing-ish players, and one of them might have the shooting, but they're not really an athlete. Others might defend really well, but they can't shoot at all. Hunter bridges the gap pretty well. And I think another player who bridges the gap well, who also was a big-time high school recruit, also in the ACC and also on my list, is Matthew Cleveland from Miami. Now, he's averaging 15 points, 5 rebounds a game, because he's, more 6'7" than Hunter is 6'5". 2 assists, 1.5 steals, half a block. He's shooting 58, 41, 74. And shooting was his question as well. He really couldn't shoot when he first got to Florida State. He transferred from Florida State to Miami this year. But last year at Florida State, shot 35% on sort of 2 attempts a game. Now that's gone up, and he's shooting, I think, 2.5 or 3 attempts a game. He's also, like I said, I believe he has made over 23s already. So again, using that very rough 53s estimate, if he gets up to that number, then I'll feel certainly pretty good about it sticking. Even if he makes 43s, I'll feel pretty good about Cleveland sticking, because he's a bit bigger than Sallis, a bit, traditionally wingier. Now, it will maybe be forgotten a little bit at Miami that he is a genuinely good defensive prospect, because Miami, like Wake, is an extremely offensively tilted team, one of the most offensively tilted in the country, and they are undersized. Cleveland at 6'6", 6'7" might be their tallest player, because Norchad Omier is their center, and he's an undersized center. So the fact that Miami as a whole is not a great defensive team might lead to a slight suppression of Cleveland's defensive talent. I'm not going to tell you he's one of the 5 best defenders in the draft, but I think that he's going to be able to cover ground. He can contest with length, and he can finish with length on offense. When you think about wings, what makes someone a wing is whether they can actually drive and finish over NBA caliber length, and can they actually close out and contest and bother NBA caliber length on the other end. And I think that Cleveland can. And because Miami is so offensively tilted, they space the floor well, the way a lot of NBA teams do. And Cleveland is getting increased reps at making those reads on the move when he has the ball, and they've got Wooga Poplar. He'll be a draft pick. They got Nigel Pack, who's a very good offensive college guard. Bensley Joseph and Norchad Omier. My episode with anytime Brian Geisinger is on, but including my recent one with him, we talk about Miami because Brian's an ACC guy and we love Miami. So his offensive development is really catching up to, I think, what made him such an exciting athlete coming into Florida State. And that, again, is going to bridge the gap in a way that a lot of wing bets don't. So I think that Matthew has a good chance to be drafted in the first round. That's where I think he belongs. I, again, think that he is a tier 7 starter theory or perhaps tier 6 matchup starter level player. So certainly should go in the top 35, in my opinion, if not the top 25. So the fifth and final, this is going to be a guy I talk about in more depth in my Big 12 episode, hopefully coming out next week, is Otega Oweh, who is a guard at the University of Oklahoma. So Otega, he turns 21 on New Year's Day. January 1st, 03 is his birthday. He is averaging 15 points, 4 rebounds a game, 2.5 steals. I mean, he is a real defensive, physically, he is a real talent. He's not on Devin Carter's level in terms of technique game after game. His footwork isn't as good, but he has a lot of physical talent as a defender, built very, very strongly. But 15, 4 rebounds, 2.5 steals, half a block, and an assist a game, which are good numbers for a sophomore. Oklahoma is one of the sort of pleasant surprises of the college year because they just lost their first game. Forgetting who they played this week, but they were undefeated, 7th-ranked team in the country. And Otega in that game scored, 21 points on 10 shots because he made 10 of 11 from the line. And that's the other thing about Otega is that his shooting splits don't really sound real because he is currently shooting as a guard, remember, as a 6'5", 6'6" guard. 66% from the field, 71% from 3, and 79% from the line. So his 3-point percentage, a little fluky. And I think that he's maybe 10 of 13 from 3 on the year or 10 of 14. And so, you would like to see the volume come up, of course. And his shot motion is really in front of his face, which as someone who's, in the 6'5" range as a guard is probably not good enough. He's going to have to speed it up and lift it a little bit. But I believe in Otega's touch when I watch him because first of all, he has great burst to get into the lane. He can elevate. And so he can get good looks for himself. And his shoulders are just sort of always square towards the hoop when he lets it go. And he's got broad shoulders. He's got very legit NBA frame to him. And that's why the 3-point percentage is not, obviously it's not going to be in the 70s. It might end up somewhere around 35%. Maybe he makes 33s on the year, or maybe he makes 25 threes on the year and shooting is still his question, which it might be. But the 60+% from 2 is what intrigues me more because when that guy puts the ball on the deck, not many guys in college basketball can stay in front of him. Not many want to stay in front of him because Otega can really be physical and stay on balance and finish. He can also, as a cutter, obviously get good looks for himself as a cutter, but he can elevate and finish. Oklahoma has another player, Javian McCollum, who's sort of their point guard and sort of their high volume 3-point shooter. And he and Otega have good chemistry. McCollum can really find him, but that guy, Oweh, is a legit NBA level finisher, in my opinion, and is built kind of in the same way that Kason Wallace is built and was at Kentucky last year. Kason is not the most creative driver in the world. He's a good passer, really good passer, much better than Otega. But what made him such a good prospect apart from his defense was that he just had great touch, even on contested drives. And he could be physical and shoot over other guards in the post. His 3-point shot went down. And I see lots of similar elements in Otega's game as a scorer. Now, he's not the same level of prospect as Wallace, not the same overall player currently, but these games where he's getting, 15 points on 10 shots, 20 points on 12 shots, I expect that to carry through a lot in Big 12 play because he is just physically, he is just going to be a lot for people to deal with. And I think he will continue to draw fouls. And I really believe in that touch. And when you combine touch, physicality, NBA level frame, and I think defensive tools, at least, you have another guy that's going to be able to play with other star talent. And he's like, Otega might be the quote unquote rawest player on this list, but that's a bet at real NBA productivity to me. There are players that will get drafted in front of him who, again, have certain parts of their game that like look nice, but at the end of the day, night in and night out, you're playing, and I'm naming guys. I'll just name them off of my piece here. Guys who are in tier 7. These are not starters. These are backups that just get extended by their drafting teams. Guys like Marcus Sasser on the Pistons, who's National Player of the Year for University of Houston. Is the player that you like going to be able to guard Marcus Sasser and really bother him? Is he going to give Marcus Sasser, who's a great on-ball defender, problems in driving to the hoop? Because if he's not, he's going to be in trouble. Jet Howard, who went 11th overall to Orlando, currently playing in their G League. Jet's 6'7", 6'8", with a lightning trigger and has good connecting passing vision. Is that guy going to be able to really punish Jet's, sort of iffy NBA athleticism? What it takes to beat even bench rotation players in the NBA is a lot. You have to have something about you that is legitimately very special, and you need to sort of lack a fatal flaw. Otega has stuff about him in his burst and athleticism, strength and touch that is special. That release point might be a fatal flaw, but if I'm going to go down and like wash out on a prospect, I want to make sure that the guy that I'm lining up behind to flame out is going to like get a lot of chances before he does. And that stuff is going to get Otega a lot of chances no matter where he goes. So Otega might not even get drafted this year. He might be told to go back to Oklahoma, or he might get drafted 50th or something and have to earn his way through summer league. But some smart team should give him a chance. I'll talk more about him next week, but he's my last guy. So we've got Hunter Sallis, Otega Oweh, Devin Carter, Matt Cleveland, PJ Hall. To place Otega in these tiers the way that I've done with everyone else, I think that his skill level is potentially special enough to get in sort of that matchup starter territory, or maybe even starter territory. That would be a wild outcome for him to be sort of, the starter territory, which I haven't talked about much this episode, but that's tier 5. That's consensus draft value 9 to 13. I'm not going to have Otega in my lottery unless, that 3-point, unless these percentages just persist. But the players who are in that tier are like Christian Brown, Quentin Grimes, Wallace, Cam Whitmore, who's leading the G League in scoring right now, Derek Lively. These are physically very, very gifted players. But Otega is in their company as a physical guy, a real NBA athlete with real NBA touch. So I think if the ceiling for him there is maybe to become a starter in the NBA, what's most likely is that he's a high rotation guy who is like just a mess stuff up guy when he gets in. So Otega Oweh, Devin Carter, Matt Cleveland, PJ Hall, Hunter Sallis. There, I have done it. I have gotten through 5 sleepers. I promise to try to get back with more regular episodes. Merry Dartmas to all, and to all a good night.